Hello, sports history fans. I'm Harv Aronson from the Total Sports Recall podcast. You're about to jump into another thrilling sports history moment, but first let's dive into today's sponsor just in time for the holiday season. Introducing Art of Words, the brainchild of word artist Dan Duffy from Philadelphia. Dan meticulously crafts stunning images by handwriting relevant words from some of the greatest sports moments in time. These unique, budget-friendly illustrations are the perfect gift, sparking cherished memories and capturing hearts. Choose from city skylines, sports, history, and musicians to find a piece for everyone. And here's the exciting part. For that sports fanatic in your life, gift them a piece of their favorite team or player's history. Art of Words tells a compelling story. Explore collegiate stadiums, each meticulously crafted with every football victory etched in words. Or venture into baseball stadiums, handwritten with every player from the team's illustrious history. Don't wait. Order a print today for yourself and your loved ones this holiday season. Transform your wall into a gallery of captivating art and surprise your family and friends with a print of their own. Use code SHN15 at artofwords.com for a 15% discount on your order in November and December. Visit Art of Words, where words magically transform into stunning art, evoking cherished memories and touching the hearts of those you care about. Again, use the code SHN15 for a 15% off at artofwords.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Yesterday's Sports on the Sports History Network. Today's special guest is Olympic weightlifter Mark Levell. Mark is a former national champion in the 82.5 kilo weight class. And for those who might not know exactly what that means, it means he was the best weightlifter in the USA in his weight class for that particular year. And that was in 1984. And Mark has achieved many other accomplishments during his weightlifting career, and we'll be discussing those accomplishments during the course of this interview. Unlike my last two weightlifting guests, I never got to train with Mark, being that I was from New Jersey and he was from Chicago. We never got to train together, but we got to know each other through social media. So, welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Oh, you're welcome. Good to have you. So we'll start with the obvious question is, what got you interested in Olympic weightlifting?
Oh, yeah, great question. My first experience with Olympic weightlifting was Wide World of Sports in 1970. They had Vasily Alekseyev do his 227.5, and I was mesmerized by the way that he lifted that. At the time I didn't know it, the clean and jerk.
Right.
But at that time, I just thought that all weightlifters were these really big, huge guys, right? And I'm really tiny. So I didn't give it much thought. And then, like a lot of people, I got to high school and started playing high school football.
Right.
And wanted to improve performance. And my brother gave me a bunch of strength and health magazines. I still wish that publication was going. Yeah. And then I saw smaller guys, weight classes. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. So I played football for 2 years, but I was so small, and I'm thinking to myself, my size in football is a tremendous disadvantage. In weightlifting, it's an advantage. So I drifted into weightlifting.
Right. Well, that's interesting because that's very similar to my story. I remember watching Vasily Alekseyev on Wide World of Sports. 1970, I was only 8 years old, but I was like you, I was just mesmerized by the fact that he could clean and jerk over 500 pounds. But then, like you said, I thought all weightlifters were big, he had that big belly, and I thought all weightlifters, were that were that big. I didn't realize there were different weight classes.
Yeah, one of the magazines that my brother gave me, I flipped open the magazine and there was a picture of Riegert.
Right.
And I was like, holy cow, that guy is athletic. He's built.
Yeah.
I was like, man, that was one of my role model idols.
Right.
And of course, being smaller, the smaller guys, I was like, wow, it's kind of like wrestling with weight divisions. You know how it is. And made more sense to me.
Yes. And at that time they had 10 different weight classes, right?
Yes.
I think
actually, when I first started, they did not have the 100 kilo class, and then that came in later.
Right.
So, actually, these days with all the constant changing every few years, it's kind of hard to keep up on everything.
Oh yeah, I can't keep track of the weight classes. Now, when you started, they didn't still have the press, did they?
Correct. It was already eliminated. So I always tell people I was the first generation that did not have to press at Sayre Park. So I would see the guys, they would still do pressing, and it just amazed me. Like, the truth is, the first time I saw it, I wasn't even 100% sure what it was. It looked like some kind of push press.
Right.
And they said, oh yeah, that's a press, So a couple of the guys, it was almost like a standing bench press. They had gotten so far back.
I guess that's part of the reason they eliminated it. It became so hard to judge because they were using the leg kick and leaning back. Like you said, It almost looked like a standing bench press.
Yeah. And the other thing that I noticed about, I didn't experience it personally, but I always ask those guys, how long did a weightlifting contest take? With it, they're pretty long with just the snatch and the clean and jerk. So there'd be like a third longer trying to get the press in also.
That's right. I remember when I first started the gym I was going to in Belleville, New Jersey. Bruce Clemens, the photographer, the famous weightlifting photographer, was training there. And when he was started weightlifting, they still had the press. And he told me that one time there was a meet in Philadelphia that he was competing in, and they had to do all 3 lifts. And by the time the competition was over, it was like well past midnight. And he had his car in a parking garage, and they locked up the parking garage. He couldn't even get his car out of there. Well, that's how long the contest would go.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So when was your first, what year was your first competition?
So my first competition was in 1977. I kind of started trying to figure out Olympic lifting on my own, like a lot of people have to do. And I went to the Cincinnati Novice Open Meet in late 77, totally self-trained, 67.5 kilos. I did 80 and 110.
Oh,
but more importantly, for me, I met Marty Schnorf.
Uh-huh.
He was Kurt White's coach and Stuart Thornburg's coach, and he told me about Mark Lemanager and Sayre Park. And to this very day, Marty is a very close friend of mine. I owe him a lot. He helped me any way he could, still does. So it was the bigger thing for me was getting direction. I had heard of Sayre Park, but at that time I was so young I wasn't even driving. It's pretty far from my house, but I went there. I met Mark Lemanager. Mark Lemanager sacrificed a lot of time and energy on us, which is greatly appreciated. To this very day, I realize what he did for us. So that got me going.
Well, Okay, so then from that, so you were pretty successful in your first competition, and from there, you decided you liked it, and you got some good coaching. So uh, from there, what was your next competition, or what was your first really like your first major step to a more substantial competition?
Yeah, like I started training, making steady progress with the direction of Mark Morthier. And here at the time, we had a meet called the Mid Americans,
Right.
and it had a very high qualifying total. Just to qualify for the meet, you had to be pretty good. So, eventually I got, worked my way into where I could qualify for that. Eventually, I qualified for the nationals. And I had gone to meets like in like 1980. I went to the nationals in Philadelphia,
Right.
and I went to the collegiate nationals in York, Pennsylvania.
Right.
So between like 78 and 80, I was kind of working my way up into the national competitions.
Okay. So 1979 or 1980 was your first nationals?
Yeah, I did. I lifted well. I was still at 67.5 in 1980, but I was having a hard time making weight. And at the National Collegiates in New York, at 67.5, I did 112.5 and 145. And at the time, those the clean and jerk and the total were national collegiate records at the time. And I think the snatch tied it. And then
okay.
we went to the nationals in Philadelphia. I didn't snatch well there. I only made 105. But I came back and I made a 150 in the clean and jerk. So that was, I always favored the clean and jerk.
Right. Yeah, me too. I favored the clean and jerk. Definitely. Well, for those who don't know, we are the numbers that Mark's giving are kilos. This is not pounds. In America, most people don't know kilos unless they're weightlifters. So 150 kilos is 330 pounds. So that's a big clean and jerk for someone at that body weight of 148 pounds was the weight class.
Yeah.
So that was a big lift. So from that point, so that was your first nationals, and then you continued to qualify.
Yeah, in 81, I moved up to the 75 kilo class, and we went to San Francisco for the nationals. I took second there to Fred Lowe, to one of America's legends.
Right.
I had a picture of Fred Lowe from a Strength and Health magazine tacked up on my bulletin board in my bedroom. So it's like, oh my God, this guy's like an idol. So he won. He lifted. I did 125 and 167.5 at 75 kilos in that meet. And if I remember correctly, Fred made all of his lifts, including a fourth attempt clean and jerk at like 183, I want to say. I made all my lifts, and John Orlando, who took third, he made all his lifts. Wow. So of the top three, there were no missed lifts.
Wow, that's incredible.
And then I went to the collegiates that year, too. I won again. I did 120 and 165, I think it was, at the collegiates in Auburn, Alabama.
Uh-huh.
So
that
then
the 1981 nationals that you were talking about, I remember that's the year I started competing. So I was reading, I was trying to get familiar with the top lifters. And I remember seeing a picture of Fred Lowe at that competition. Like you said, fourth attempt, I think that was something like 402 pounds.
Right. At the time and up until recently, it was the most any middleweight had ever clean and jerked.
Right.
And then I think it held that way all the way until CJ Cummings. So it was there for a long time. CJ obviously being a very talented lifter.
Right.
So Fred's lift there was amazing. So in '82, I was also at 75, and Fred wasn't there. Kel Shake was there. Another great lifter. He had lifted at 67.5 the year before, and he I want to say he snatched either 150 or 152.5 at 75 kilos, which was the most any middleweight had snatched at that time. So in that meet, I did 125, 165. I was looking for 127.5 and 170, but on my third attempt snatch, I almost dislocated my elbow.
Whoa.
Which was really torqued, and it made jerking very sensitive, very painful.
Oh yeah.
But so I fell a little short of what I was shooting for, but thankful that I didn't flat out totally dislocate my elbow.
Oh boy, yeah, that was a close call.
I don't know if you remember this, but around that time, Alico had improved their bars.
That's right.
And they were spinning faster,
Right.
So I just wasn't quite used to it. And I do know that, a couple other people, said, oh, yeah, that bar really whips now. It's going good. I mean, Alico's a fine, great product. So,
right.
But I think it was just a matter of it was much better than anything I had trained on.
Yeah, not being used to it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get... Yeah, so I could see how that could affect you on the snatch, because once you got into the bottom position, the bar was kind of still, the bar is kind of still spinning.
Yep.
Used to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was jerking, it's like, oh man, it was, I didn't think it would go out, but your hands being closer. But
right.
Boy, that elbow was my left elbow was pretty sensitive.
Yeah.
So
then now we're at, so now in 1980. Now during this time, was there any other than the nationals? Were there any other major competitions that you qualified for?
Yeah, in '83, we went to the nationals, and I took third. I moved up to 82.5 and took third there. And if I remember correctly, Kurt White won the meet. Tremendous lifter. And Pete Klein took second. He lifted very, very well too. And that was, I qualified for this meet in Edmonton, Canada. It's called the Edmonton Cup.
Uh-huh.
So we went up there. The Canadians were very good to us. Right. So we had a meet. So beside the nationals, that was the other big meet. I took second there in Edmonton. I don't remember what exactly I did. I think it was like 130 and 175 or something like that.
Okay.
So
where was the 1983 nationals?
83 was in Seekonk.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That was a good meet. Like actually all the nationals I went to, they were well run. Jim Schmitz had San Francisco, 81. 82, we had it in Northbrook, Illinois.
Right.
Seekonk, 83. York, 84. York is like the mecca of Olympic weightlifting.
Right. So let's talk about the 1984 is an Olympic year.
Yes.
That was the year of the Los Angeles Olympics. So that was that 1984. You were involved in a three-way tie, is correct?
That is correct. 310 was the total achieved by myself, George Prazura and Al Jakubowski. Through the years, especially at that time, and I know that you will know this, it's a pretty small community. Everybody kind of knows each other, so, I knew them. They're great. They were great lifters. They're great people, so we all knew it was going to be a tight contest. Right. So, I did everything I could to be prepared for that meet, which was a little difficult. Injuries were starting to mount, You know how it is. It's pretty rough sport on the body.
After so many years, it starts to take its toll on your joints. But what you mentioned there, one of the things I always loved about Olympic weight, I've competed in Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting, and Olympic weightlifting, I always felt like it was very, like you say, everybody kind of pulled for each other. It's kind of like a fraternity, Like,
yes.
Everyone pulled for each other, and I didn't find that as much in powerlifting. But that nationals, there is a story about the bananas. You want to share that story with us?
Sure, I know that you had heard that. So during the weigh-in, I was sitting pretty much next to George and Al Jakubowski.
Right.
And we all knew that we were going to make weight, because we had checked before. And Al asked me, he had a bunch of bananas, and he asked me if I wanted a banana. And I declined. I didn't want one at that time. So as it turned out, the three of us tied at 310 kilos, and I was the lightest man. So Al, who's from Michigan, or at the time he was from Michigan, I think he lives on the East Coast now. So I've seen Al at several competitions. He used to joke that I beat him by a banana.
Right.
So.
Well, who knows? If you would have eaten the banana, who knows, right?
Yeah, could have been different.
Yeah. But you were smart enough to not eat it.
Right. Yeah, I had told Mark the manager that this was going to be a tight contest, so I wanted to be the lightest of the three, if possible.
And you were. No. So did it come down? It came down to the final lift. You had to make your final lift.
Yeah, actually, it was my second attempt. So what had happened was, George Prazura was the most balanced lifter. Right. And I think he did 135, 175. Very balanced. He always was very balanced lifter. Very good in the snatch, but he could clean and jerk too.
Right.
Al favored the snatch, and I can't remember I think he did 140 and 170. And I was on the other end. I was the guy that favored the clean and jerk, and I did 130 and 180. So Al was like the snatch expert. I was the clean and jerk expert, and George was the more balanced of the two of us.
Right.
So on my second attempt, I took 170 on my opener. Then Mark the manager and I knew there's no reason to take anything less than 180, because 180 would get 310 and I would win on body weight. So we went right to that, and I made it on the second attempt.
Right. Okay. Now, did that qualify you for the Olympic trials?
It did. What had happened, injuries were mounting. Right. So I decided early on, I was going to try to go to the Olympic trials. They were in Las Vegas. And I was going to try to go, but I was like, I'm going to do everything I can for the nationals, because, even with the Russian boycott or the European boycott, Eastern European, it's very prestigious to make an Olympic team. Don't get me wrong, but I was going to go after that national title, right? And I was able to get that. But then my back was starting to go out, and my wrist was starting to hurt. And by the time it got to to the Olympic trials in Vegas, I just couldn't really support weights overhead. My wrist, it had gotten a small stress fracture in my wrist.
Right.
And especially in a snatch, it made snatching really difficult. Not so much in a clean and jerk, but the snatch was excruciating. And after that, I just kind of fell off after that, after 84.
Okay, so there was after 84, you didn't compete in any more nationals?
Now, after my wrist, no more nationals. After my wrist healed, I lifted in one more meet, and I could tell that my wrist was not going to hold for long. And my back, even to this day, my back still bugs me a little bit. So I'm like, plus, you know how it gets to, like, career starts becoming more demanding.
Right.
And family, I wanted to start a family and stuff like that. So I figured it was just a good time to retire and move on to other stuff without doing too much more damage to myself.
Right. Well, I do remember when I first started competing myself, I do remember many of the lifters warning me that, you're not going to get any kind of government support. You're on your own in this sport. There isn't any. It's not like the Eastern Europeans, where they're basically doing this as a job, the weightlifting.
Yeah.
And that was
exactly right. Like, I always said this. I even mentioned it to Mark Cameron one time through Facebook. I honestly believe that if Mark Cameron had the same setup as the Eastern Europeans, he would have beat them. Same thing with Lee James. And, Mark in his typical, humor said something like, yeah, but I would have never have met Joe Mills, So, but I honestly do believe had there was other U.S. lifters too that if they had the same environment, they would have won. They would have beat them.
Yeah, it was tough. That's one thing I remember. That was probably the biggest complaint of the lifters, that you were basically on your own. You had to work a full-time job during the day, and after you got out of work, you had to go and train for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
It takes its toll.
It does. So, and then, like you were saying, there's no financial subsidies. So you're paying to train, you're paying to go to competitions and stuff like that. So at the time, and it probably was this way for you also, like, Sayre Park is part of the Chicago Park District.
Right.
So the yearly fee was just minor stuff. Mark Lemenager coached me, never charged me a penny. In fact, I'm sure I cost him money through the years.
Right.
So, nowadays it's gotten different where, people are trying to hire themselves out as coaches. Like, I came from, not a poor family, but if I had walked into a gym and someone told me they wanted $150 a month, they wouldn't have been my coach.
Right.
There's no way that could have happened where I came from. So probably the same for you there in Belleville, right?
It's exactly how it was. That's why I say it was very much like a family, a fraternity. I had Coach Bucky Cairo and a lot of people there. Tim Queso, Brian Derwin. These guys helped me, and never. They did it out of the goodness of their heart. They just, everybody wanted to help each other.
Yeah, that's how it was. Like, before I ever went to Sayre Park, I knew Mike Cardchute. Sayre Park had some really good weightlifters. Mike Cardchute, Rick Holbrook. Although Rick later lifted for York, he would still train at Sayre Park.
Right.
He was actually kind of done when I got to Sayre Park, but Cardchute was there, Chuck Newtons, Gene Waldo, and they were like that. They, beside Mark Lemenager, they kind of explain to you how things are and stuff like that. And, I'm sure it was this way too. I mean, with the lifters that you named, like at Sarah Park, pretty much every week you saw someone snatch 300 or above and clean and jerk 400 and above. It was common, you know. So, like Mike Karchut was one of the big influences on me. He did everything fast. He could even press fast. He would still press, not heavy, but just for like regular training. I used to think to myself, I'd watch him and I go, this is a speed sport. You got to really make these barbells move,
Oh, yeah.
So, Mike, I'm sure Mike's history. He was like an 8-time national champion. So it was great to train with him for all those years.
I believe he is the guy. I used to see the pictures of him in the magazines. And I don't think I ever saw a picture of him where he was wearing weightlifting shoes. He would wear those Puma sneakers.
Yeah, and he'd have them built up in the back. He would take them to a shoemaker, and they'd build them up to his specifications.
Right.
At the 83 Nationals, I happened to be standing in the warm-up room. I was done lifting, and so was Mike, and we were just standing there. And Bruce Clemens came along, and he seen us there. He knew us. I know Bruce.
Right.
He's a legend in weightlifting. Yeah. And he snapped a nice picture, of Mike and I that I always treasure to this day.
Oh, that's good.
Now, you mentioned Brian Derwin. Now, the lifters you mentioned are fantastic lifters. But I always remember in 1980, one of my all-time favorite lifts was Brian Derwin's 2075 in a clean and jerk. Yeah. I remember that lift. That was an amazing lift. So one of my all-time favorite lifts.
That's right.
Was Brian Derwin.
He needed that lift to win.
That's right. He beat Guy Carlton.
What were your best competition lifts in the snatch?
Okay, so it's 67.5. There were 112.5 and 150. Not done on the same day, though. 75 kilos, it was 125 and 167. And at 82.5, it was 130 and 180. And even at the 83 Nationals, I was already starting to have wrist issues. I probably should have had it x-rayed sooner. Mm-hmm. I just, it's like getting like progressively worse, but...
Right.
So, and I was, I didn't lift much more in training than I did in meets, so in training, they were pretty much the same, in fact, the meets I usually got 7.5 kilos more in the meet than I did in training.
Wow. Oh, so 180, that's, for those who don't know the kilos, that's only like 4 pounds away from 400 pounds, right?
Yeah, 396.
Yeah, that is a very big. That's a huge clean and jerk. So that
not too bad for weighing. 100. I was like 180.5 pounds and made 396. That's not too bad.
Yeah, that's a huge lift. What about in training, as far as squats, front squats, back squats?
Yeah, we were a little more into reps. I did in the front squat, I did 205 for a triple. And in the back squat, I did 227.5 for a triple. And after that, I did I can't remember, I think it's 240, comes out to 528. Just for a single, it wasn't that hard.
Right.
And I also did, in the back squat, I did 220 for 5. This was when I was at 82.5. I was a good squatter.
Right.
So.
And how often, how many times a week would you squat?
We trained 4 days a week. We would squat at least 3 days a week. And if there was a fourth day of squats, it was, not super heavy. Mark Lemanager had it. He was ahead of his time with the training. And, Mark we used to also communicate, and I still do sometimes, with Jim Schmitz from
Okay.
San Francisco.
Yep.
And the one thing that Jim was the first one that I noticed, and Mark would do it too, is that they were trying to get the most out of their weightlifters within the constraints of the U.S. system, like you were talking about, having
Right.
a job, having a family. Because a lot of Jim's lifters only trained 3 days a week. They trained hard and they trained long, but he's like, he said something to me one time like, when he would tell the lifters, when you're here, I have you, you're mine.
Right.
But then I want you to do all the other stuff that you need to do. You do that, But when you're here, we're going to train. So, and Mark was the same way. He was resistant to, like, every once in a while we'd say, hey, maybe we should train 5 days a week, and we tried it a couple times, but he was like, nah, let's just do 4 and do your other stuff.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. So, then after your competing days were over, you did some coaching.
Yeah, I actually was not involved in weightlifting other than watching it from afar.
Right.
Of course, guys like Suleimanov, he was already around when as I was ending, but he just went on to make these amazing lifts, and then there were guys that like Vardanyan and Zlatev and Rusev, although Rusev was around. So I'd watch it. And then to me, like, weightlifting kind of went into a funny period. You may feel the same way, where it was hard to keep up. They kept changing the weight classes and changing the records and stuff like that. And years later, Rick Holbrook's nephew, Kevin Holbrook, he called me up and he asked me, we went out for a pizza, me, him, and another guy named Kevin Duba. Right. And he was asking me, they were training at Sayre Park, but they really had no plan.
Yeah.
So all I really did for them was to give them plans that I had learned from the manager and Schmitz, because I felt that, you have to do it within, we can't go to the gym 2 or 3 times a day.
No.
5 days, 6 days a week. That's just not our schedules,
No.
So I did that for a while, but, I hate to admit it, but I'm getting up in age. It's getting harder to coach, to find the energy level. And then COVID came along and everything was closed, so that kind of put the end to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a little bit of my son got into lifting, and I was coaching him for a while, but like you said, it takes a lot of energy to coach too. It's not, I found it almost more difficult than actually competing myself. The coaching is very nerve-wracking, and you feel like, if the lifter doesn't make the lifts, you feel like it's your fault,
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. It was much easier being a lifter than a coach.
Right. Yeah. Very, yeah.
So then when I left Sayre Park, they had a lot of young, talented lifters and coaches, and so they're in good hands. Kind of like the lead coach there now, Alex Arkia. I coached him for a few years. He knows what he's doing. He's young and energetic. Mm-hmm. So they're doing fine. Weightlifting's changed a bit too. Like some of the training principles are different than they were. I don't know if they're any better or any worse because I never tried them. But I was always pretty basic. We were like snatch, clean and jerk, the accessories like power snatch, power clean, power jerk, front squat, back squat, pulls. We didn't get too crazy with these weird combinations.
Yeah.
Or at least what I would call weird combinations. We were pretty basic,
Right. I agree. It's changed a lot, and Yeah, I think even some of the techniques have seemed to have changed. One thing I notice is that I was always the way I was taught is keep the bar close to your thigh, brush the thighs, and don't bang it off your hips. But now they seem to want to bang it. It seems like they're banging it off their hips. That seems to be the new technique.
Yeah, I remember one year, and I can't remember exactly what year it is, 75 or 76. Strength and Health ran an article that featured, I can't remember how you say his first name, Nikolai Koloff from Bulgaria.
Right,
And they were talking about the double knee bend.
right.
And that's what they were talking about in my day. And that's what LeManager taught us, how to do that.
That's right.
And what was interesting was I had looked at pictures of Rick Holbrook in 1972 before the Bulgarians had ascended. They were already good, but not like what they became. And Rick Holbrook was basically doing what they were calling the double knee bend. They were a little more down and the knees a little more forward, but he was basically doing the double knee bend. And some people say they picked it up from him, So he was. I don't know if you remember Rick, but he was there. He had to press too, but he was a snatch, clean and jerk guy. He wasn't average in the press, but he made up for it in the quick lifts.
Right, right. Well, yeah, that's what I was taught too. The double knee bend, where they call it where I trained, they would call it the scoop. But
yeah, we would say, once the bar passed the knees, we would say scoop.
Right, right.
Yeah, it would go in and you would push in. And what's kind of funny, like with some of the people I coached or some of the people that had come through Sarah Park, they would say, stuff like, the double knee bend doesn't exist. It's an old technique or something like that. And I go, yeah, you want to know something? You're doing it.
Yeah.
You may not be doing it completely, but here's you in video. Watch what your legs do, right? And this is a still sequence of a double knee bend, and look what you're doing. It's pretty much the same thing. You may not call it that, but that's what you're doing.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that was kind of a big source of controversy at the time.
It was.
Yeah.
So I would just tell them, call it what you want, do what you want, but that's what I believed in. That that's what got the results for us.
That's right. And I remember all of our sweatpants would always get holes in the front of them.
We'd iron on patches or sew patches on.
Patches, yeah. We'd have to put the patches on.
Yeah.
So once you were pretty much out of weightlifting and weren't coaching anymore, what you had some hobbies that kept you occupied?
Yeah, I tried some, like a lot of lifters, I tried some martial arts stuff, see how that was, and got into cycling. I've been cycling for many years. There's something sort of primitively meditating. I live right by Lake Michigan, so I can go up and down the lakefront path. Chicago's got a spectacular skyline. And, I go out there. I'm getting exercise, but I'm enjoying it. I always love to see the skyline and the lake and stuff like that. So, that's pretty much even what I'm doing today. So beside my wife and my daughter and my granddaughter and my son-in-law, it's them and then cycling.
Right. Well, that seems to be a popular sport for like a lot of weightlifters. It seems after they retire from weightlifting, they get into cycling. I guess because they figure they already have the leg strength, so it's a kind of a natural transition.
Yeah. One time, a lifter / cyclist, mostly a lifter, said to me, I think cycling's harder than lifting. And I said, oh, hell yeah. Like in lifting, this is over in 5 or 10 seconds. You make it or you don't.
Right.
You're right in the Tour de France. You're suffering 3 weeks, going up and down the Pyrenees and the Alps and stuff. Like one time, just out of curiosity, they had it wasn't a bike race. They call them these rides. It was called the North Shore Century. So I rode my bike from here to a suburb called Evanston, which is about 6 miles from here. I rode the Century 100 miles, and then I rode back to my house. So it was like 112 miles.
Wow.
Took me almost 8 hours. And I'm thinking, these Tour de France guys, they're doing this pretty much every day for 3 weeks. And I'm on a flat course. I'm not going up and down mountains.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, I got to, I had a big respect for them anyway, but even more so after that.
Wow. I can't imagine. That is pretty grueling. Well, I think I thank you for your time. Is there anything else you wanted to add to it?
No, I just say, thank you for what you're doing. Kind of keep the old stuff in light and in focus. There's a lot to be learned from back then.
Yes, I want to continue to interview more weightlifters. You're actually my third weightlifter that I've interviewed. I started with George Pajura, Mike Listra. Now I don't know. He's probably quite a bit younger than you. So I don't know. When you were in the 75 kilo class, do you ever remember competing against him?
No, I do think he came a few years after me.
Right.
He's a very talented lifter. Being that I was a 67.5, 75, and 82.5, I always had a soft place in my heart for the smaller lifters.
Right.
So I seen him lift, in magazines and stuff like that.
Right.
I was always kind of rooting for him, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because he was a high quality lifter. One of the things too for lifters in those weight categories is those are extremely competitive classes.
Oh yeah.
There's just a lot of human beings that fall in that body weight range. So to achieve those results, it's under a lot of good competition.
That's right. 75 kilo class and the 82.5 kilo class were always the most highly populated. They had the most lifters. I remember looking at the rankings, and there were way more lifters in those two weight classes. Because, like you said, that's kind of like the average size for a man.
Yep.
So I started in the 75 kilo class, moved up to 82.5, and I got up, once I started clean and jerk, I was much better at the clean and jerk. I was over 300 pounds, and I thought, oh, I'm doing pretty good. And then I looked at what some of the other guys in that weight class were doing. I said, well, I got a long way to go.
Yeah, but that's still a darn good lift. Don't cut yourself short. One thing that I thought about years later is, they would always give you like these theoretical numbers, like you should snatch like 80% of your best clean. Have you ever heard anything like that?
Yeah.
So I was always like 73%, 75%. And what I noticed as I looked back is the first time that I ever did anything that resembled a snatch,
right,
and the first time I ever did anything that resembled a clean and jerk, I was at like 73 or 75%, and it pretty much stayed that way, regardless of what I tried to do.
right.
So toward the end of my career, I just said to myself, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to snatch all I can snatch. I'm going to clean and jerk all I can clean and jerk, and that'll get me to the total. But I'm not going to take time away from the clean and jerk trying to make this better.
Right.
When now I'm, trying, I'm making maybe minimal progress with my weaker lift, and I'm hurting my better lift.
That's right.
So my advice to the clean and jerk people is just do the best you can in both lifts, but don't hurt your better lift, to try to make the other one better.
Right. I would agree with that. Absolutely.
So.
Well, it was a lot of fun interviewing you, and thank you for joining us. I hope this will help. Maybe some of the younger lifters will listen to the interview and hopefully get some good tips from what you've said.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Okay, Mark, thank you for taking the time. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
All right, take care. God bless. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Hello, football friends. This is Darren Hayes of the Pigskin Dispatch podcast, and I'd like to invite you to the portal of positive football history, Pigskin Dispatch and pigskindispatch.com. We talk about everything that centers around the game of American football, expert discussions, the origins of the games, the great players, teams, and coaches, and more, and some great guests and insights from experts. We have new episodes 3 to 4 times a week, and you can find us on sportshistorynetwork.com, pigskindispatch.com, or your favorite podcast provider.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.